you've noticed recently that a number of my colleagues out on YouTube, the reviewers, have been talking about a new product, a preamplifier and power amplifier from the firm QUAD, namely the 303 combination. And it's been getting pretty favourable reviews. But I've wanted to get my hands on these for quite a long time, but there seems to be a shortage because so many people in the world are buying them, mostly young people, I'm told, from the marketing department of QUAD, that I've had to wait a little while. But the great people, or the good people, I should say, from the distributor for the Netherlands, Transtech, they have lent me an original QUAD 303 so that I can not only get to know them both really well and play them here in my listening room, but also to make a comparison. And that video, that detailed video, will be coming up in 7 days from now, because I want to talk about a hidden gem, a really excellent piece of equipment, a combination preamplifier, power amplifier from the same company, QUAD, because it's, well, it is, as I say, a hidden gem. It's something that's been, I think, more or less completely overlooked in the review industry. I've heard the power amplifier a few times at shows and thought, nah, that's not really for me. It's just didn't sound right. It was harsh, it was this, but of course, I didn't stay long in the rooms. I didn't like the music they were playing. It was far too loud. Didn't like the sound of the room. So I didn't really pay much attention. But when I reached out to QUAD saying, look, I want to try out the 303, the marketing director said, well, Harley, why don't you at least try the amplifier, the Artera stereo amplifier or the monoblocks, because they're really good and you've never heard them, you've admitted yourself. So why don't you at least try them? So I promised him I would, and boy, am I glad that I did. So thank you, Adam. So before I talk about this combination, maybe a little bit of history on QUAD, the company, and why I'm paying a little bit of attention to it. Because if you remember in my previous video about hi-fi systems, the beginners, hi-fi for beginners, I do feature a little QUAD Vina and a pair of QUAD stereo loudspeakers in that one. So I think it's important that I put some things into perspective. And as always, you can, if you're not interested in the history and this kind of bit of the story, you can just click on the chapter below in the description and go straight through to the review itself. So let's get started then. QUAD, which was originally called Acoustical Engineering Limited, was set up in London in 1936 by a person called Peter Walker. And Peter Walker was born in 1916, so even my elementary maths tells me he was just 20 years old when he set up his manufacturing business. And what he started to do, he started out with designing tube amplifiers, of course, because the silicon transistors didn't exist then, valve amplifiers, as we say in England, for public address systems. You know, the sort of things that you would have on a station. The train on platform 4 to Beckenham Junction is leaving in 10 minutes. And obviously all over in all sorts of applications. I apologise for that. Couldn't resist it. Anyway, so that's what he started doing, making amplifiers which needed to be reliable and stable and powerful enough to drive these systems. However, in 1941, he moved his factory from the central London up to Huntingdon, where it still is today. Well, today they have their a servicing, an engineering department and a design department, and it's been there ever since. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, if you are the owner of any QUAD equipment, doesn't matter how old it is, right back to the very early amplifiers, they will still service and fix them there for you. So let's move on. So this chap, Peter Walker, who was he? He was a brilliant, brilliant engineer. And I see him a little bit like the Steve Jobs of his time, because he had very clear ideas that he wanted excellent sound quality, he wanted reliability, but he also wanted equipment that was nice to have in the home, that you could put on the sideboard and be proud of and would work beautifully. And we'll come back to that later on. But as time went by, he designed a hi-fi amp in 1948, I think was his first amplifier for the hi-fi market. And the famous Quad 2 that came out a little bit later, tube amplifier, which they still make today actually in a sort of modern version of it. It sold 90,000 units. It was incredibly successful, and most of what he did was very successful. He also invented the world's first full-range electrostatic loudspeaker, and so forth. But there was a difficult side to him, a complex side to him. He was completely unforgiving when it came to production. And so, for example, his wonderful ESL loudspeakers, the electrostatic loudspeakers, if you've never heard them, you try and go to a place where you can hear them, because they are amazing. And if you think to yourself, wow, these were made in 1958, it just blows your mind, really. And then the later ones, obviously a bit later. So when you see how he manufactured these things, how he sort of stretched them out on a table with the weights all hanging around, and if I can find a photograph, I will publish it for you here. I mean, so many people in his company said, no, you know, we can improve the production, but he refused. And of course it meant that even though it was a highly successful loudspeaker, selling thousands of, he never made any money on them. In fact, he made a loss on every single one he sold. So in the mid-80s, late 80s, his son Ross Walker took over. And eventually in the 90s, it was sold off. And then all production got moved to China, but leaving the servicing engineering department in Huntingdon, as I said earlier. So that in a nutshell is what the company was and is today. And when it moved to China, the production, you know, lots of people in England said, oh, that's the end, and the quality is going down and it's not the same. And I think Quad's reputation was severely damaged at that point, even though it still went on to produce great products as it did today. But I think this 33303 combination will bring a revival back. And in fact, the quad electrostatic loudspeakers are back in production now. The price new is very reasonable when you consider how complex they are. So I think we're on the birth of a new era of an old classic company, not as a pastiche of its previous self, but a better version of its previous self. So let's talk about the Quad Artera, shall we? Now, the one thing I said about Peter Walker being a bit like Steve Jobs is because little things. He couldn't stand the idea of dirty volume controls and on-off switches. So from fairly early on, he was designing his systems. So in fact, even without remotes in those days, the design was nice and simple. Here we have the Quad Artera Pre. This is the one I wanted to talk about because I think this is the hidden gem on the hi-fi industry today. I've got one of these in my listening room at home and in my cinema room, and I've had it for several years and it's been perfect. But I have the version with a CD slot on the front and a DAC in the back. For this purpose, I chose the Pre because I wanted the very, very best of the preamplification. And I tried this one out with our 170 tube amplifier. I tried it out with the Deckware amplifier. I've tried it out with the Pass Labs, running this as the Pre. I've tried it with the Sugden SPA4. And I have to say, it's really, really clean sounding. it just does its job. As Peter himself said, an amplifier should be a wire with gain, and meaning it should amplify the incoming signal without detracting from it or somehow disturbing it. So let's have a look at it a little bit more at the front. So at the front, as you see, it's completely plain. There are two knobs. There's a sort of a mute button and a standby button. And then this little disc here, that lights up, and that has the volume control, you know, the volume, how loud it is, it indicates that. But it's also a volume control, so you can actually just by touching it turn the volume up and down should you want to. But again, on the black part, you see, so it doesn't leave nasty dirty marks. Because Quad have also designed a very, very nice remote control, very intuitive, very stylish, very simplistic, and from here you can control everything. So on the back of the Pre, you see we have very simple arrangement. We have balanced in, balanced out. We have a number of phono inputs, RCA inputs. And before I talk about the phono amplifier, the phono stage, it is a fully balanced design. This preamplifier is a fully balanced design, so that this isn't just tagging a balanced XLR inputs or outputs on just for the sake of being able to connect to another piece. No, it's designed from the front to back. It's a very clever design because you have everything in the analog domain, of course, but the electronic switching is done obviously with modern technology, and it does not at all interfere with the performance of the preamplifier. But look, if you will, just for a minute before we talk about the features, because that's easy to see on the internet. Look at the build quality. Look at this. That switch is solid. The one thing that Peter wanted was that his amplifiers, when you switch them on, they come on, and when you switch them off, they go off. And if you buy this preamplifier, you know that this will work for the next 50 years. There's nothing cheap about it. The sockets are great. The quality of this is absolutely marvelous. These release buttons are really, really good. Way better than some, I can say, which are from amplifiers much more expensive than this. But in the design, you see now on the top, imagine a world where you just literally have this on your sideboard with nothing else, maybe your turntable next to it. And basically, from here, you would have the connections to your power amplifier or amplifiers, and they would be triggered with a 12-volt trigger, of which, of course, there are a couple on the back. Now, the big problem for most manufacturers is that, okay, if there's an amplifier, you can put your heat sinks on the side, but you still often need to release heat from the top. And like this, if I remove this lovely glass top with its chrome feet, here are the cooling vents. But instead of having these ugly things where a child could probably accidentally spill things or whatever, or dust and dirt gets in, look at any old amplifier with vents on the top, and after 10 or 20 years, especially if you've got pets in the house, it's full of dust and is actually dangerous and stops things from working properly. No, the good people at Quad came up with this brilliant idea of putting a glass lid on that just gives you enough ventilation to release it and yet allows you to have a lovely finish on the top. The finish on this is absolutely fantastic. Tucked in underneath here, you'll never see it, is a little hole and a socket for headphones. It's got a very good headphone amplifier in it. It's absolutely sufficient. Maybe not good enough for some, but for me, I found it absolutely fine. It's just neatly tucked in there. When you plug it in, it disconnects the loudspeakers, of course. So let's go back to the back again. So we have the phono input, and the phono amplifier, the phono stage in it is pretty good. I'm making a video at the moment on phono stages, and that will be coming out sometime in February. and I'm going to be comparing all sorts of phono stages. So I was just interested to try this one out, and I tried it with the Effetta 2, Epsilon 2, sorry, Epsilon 2 from Riga, which is a very expensive cartridge with a very, very low moving coil output. I mean, very low. So I thought, it's probably not going to work, but actually it worked really well. Was it fantastic? Was it dynamic? Was it the best I've ever heard? No. Was it sufficient? Yes. Was it quiet? Very. I mean, when I turned the volume right up, it was still, there was none of that horrible rumble or humming. It was just a very acceptable hiss, and it was actually much quieter than some of the others in my comparisons. Anyway, so this is perfectly good. I think if you have a high quality moving magnet, you have nothing to worry about. And if you've got the, good moving coils, as I say, I think this will be sufficient. You could try it out first and then experiment later if you really wanted to, because there's plenty of inputs anyway. There's another 3 inputs, RCA inputs, and of course you're balanced, of course, if you were going to use then obviously an external DAC, and then your balanced outputs, and you've got a preamplifier output, obviously, from balanced and RCA, and then you've got a fixed so that you can hook that to subwoofers should you ever need it. Now I have to say that this preamplifier, the Artera Pre, apart from performing really, really well, comes in a number of different versions. So as I say, you can have the, it's confusing. Let me get my notes, because you've got all these different versions. And where are we? Here we are. Look, see, we've got the Pre, which is this one here, which is the standard one. And we have the Play Plus, which is the one I've got at home, which is the CD on the front, inbuilt DAC and preamp. And then you have the Solus CD, the Solus CD DAC preamp with integrated amplifier, and the Solus Play, which is basically everything, including streaming, very much like a lot of the modern units today. But to give you an idea, if you were to look at this and you didn't know anything about it and you're looking at the finish, you could be forgiven for thinking that this is like 7,000 euros, but it's 1,300 euros. And on websites, I've been looking around, you can even get it for less. So the Pre is 1,003. The Play Plus with the CD player is 1,650. The one with the integrated amplifier and everything else is 1,999, i.e. 2,000 euros. But again, there'll be deals on this. And pay 200 euros more, you've got the streamer, you've got the amplifier and everything. But I want to focus on top of the range. That's why I've focused on Pre. So this is an extraordinarily good value for money, beautifully made preamplifier. But let me just move it a little bit over here and bring in the star of the show. Now, the star of the show, I'm keeping these gloves on because the amplifiers aren't mine and they are on loan, and I want them to go back in the condition that they arrived. So here we are. Here we have the monoblock, one of the 2 monoblocks. Now, they make a stereo version which is exactly the same as this, and it is 140 watts per channel, the stereo, which I think is absolutely sufficient for nearly everything. But the mono, which is this one, the monoblock, is 300 watts into 8 ohms. It's phenomenal. And 400 watts into 4 ohms. Now on the back, again, you have these really high quality switches, the input, you have the RCA gold plated, beautifully finished input, or the balanced input with a little button to switch between the 2. So in fact, you could have 2 different sources if you wanted to. And then you've got the trigger in and out to link this to bring this out of standby when you switch this on. And 2 good quality binding posts on the back. Again, we have the same glass top that we have on the Artera. So you could place them next to each other, or you could put this next to your loudspeakers, one each on the left and right, or you can just hide this away, as I said earlier. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about this amplifier because it's a very special design. When Peter Walker started designing transistor amplifiers, the first one was the 303, which we will talk about next week, he realized when he invented his electrostatic loudspeaker that more power would be useful. But the early transistors didn't sound very good. Getting power out of them was difficult because as they got hotter, their performance changed. And he came up with a really, really clever design. He and a colleague, Mike Albinson, came up with this incredible design. What they did was they created, which is rather simple to do, a very high quality, low powered Class A amplifier. Then they coupled it with a very high powered, lower quality Class is B, AB, that I don't quite understand exactly how that was, but a lower Class AB amplifier, if you like. Now, why would you have put a lower class in? Well, because if you couple the high quality Class A amplifier directly to the loudspeakers, and when more power is needed, more current is needed, this this high powered, lower quality amplifier will just supply the current. So it's not actually interfering with the signal path. And it's just supplying the power that's required. And the way that those two amplifiers work together and are integrated together was an incredibly clever thing. And he even won the Queen's Award for Technical Industry Award for this design. And it was first came out for the 405 amplifier, of which he sold 160,000 units. Now, the design in here is actually exactly the same. It's exactly the same principle, and it works the same way, but of course with modern technology and improved quality of components. And the result is phenomenal. So it's very close to hearing or listening to a Class A amplifier, which in fact you are, but with the grunt and the slam and the performance of a good AB amplifier. So it was a perfect combination. So where are we with these guys? To be honest with you, when I listened to them, this thing performed way better than I could possibly imagine. You may remember that I had in here a Musical Fidelity M8, which is 500 watts per channel. And with two of these, we've got 300 watts per channel. And I have to say, the Artera Pre sounded, for me, much nicer than the Musical Fidelity M8 Pre. It was, for me, cleaner. The mid-range was not exaggerated. The M8 has a tendency to be a little bit coloured in the mid-range, a little bit, for me, over warm. And this one was nice and clean, but not cold. This Pre, you can adjust all the inputs so that you can balance them. So if you've got a CD player with a high output, or a streaming device with a low output, or your phono stage, they're at different volumes. So when you switch from one to another, they're too loud or too quiet. You can adjust all that, program it into this, all basically outside the signal, and means that you can seamlessly switch from one to other without any nasty changes in volume. You can put filters on it. The very famous tilt functionality is on the preamplifier. So Peter invented this tilt function. Instead of having a bass and treble, he invented a tilt. So basically he set 750 hertz as the center of the tilt, and when you went 1 dB up, you could increase the bass in a nice curve by 1 dB and the treble drop by 1 dB, or you could tilt it in the opposite direction. And the advantage of this was you could just smooth it off or make it a little bit brighter without changing the character of the preamplifier or the music you were listening to. And I found it to be brilliant with the Sibelius here. I found that 1 dB tilt, increasing on the bass, dropping on the treble, just on some recordings took the harshness off a little bit, and then other times flat. At home I'm playing it flat all of the time, but it's lovely to have that capability. I've got a Billie Holiday record, and the brass on it, the trumpet's been remixed, and it's a bit bright. With that tilt, it sounds fabulous. So that's the kind of thing that you've got on it. Yes, you've got bass and treble controls on your remote if you want it, and you can set them per different input. So if you say, oh, with this input, I want a different setting, you can do that. So there's lots of functionality here. And it actually, for me, sounded nicer than the Musical Fidelity M8. This little guy, the 300 versus the 500 watts of the Musical Fidelity M8, they also do a 700 watts, for me was cleaner. The attack, when someone, a drumstick, the wooden stick hits the skin of a drum, it was faster. It was just more dynamic than the Musical Fidelity Big Brother. And it just was a delight to listen to. But what if I was to tell you that if you bought 2 of these, i.e. 2 monoblocks, and the preamplifier, it would cost you 4,300 euros. The Musical Fidelity M8, just the preamplifier would cost you 4,500 euros. So you would have to buy either the stereo version or monoblocks in addition. But if you were to settle for just this, the pre and the stereo version of this, well, it would only cost you 3,300 euros. Now, I know 3,300 euros for some people is a lot of money, but with this build quality, it would last you forever. Now, is this amplifier as good as our 170 amplifier, tube amplifier? Is it as good as the Pass Labs, the 9,000 euro Pass Labs? Is it as good as the 7,500 Sugden? Maybe not. Maybe it's not as holographic as our tube amplifier or a Deckware tube amplifier. But it's got lots of punch. It's got very clean bass. It's got everything you need, and it will drive, I think, anything. And if you think, oh yeah, but I need the more power from a bigger amplifier, well, please remember that the difference between 300 watts into 8 ohms and 500 watts into 8 ohms is less than 2 decibels. It's almost not noticeable. And bearing in mind that most people are listening around 86 dB with some peaks going up to 90 or 93, you're barely running at even a watt. So you've got plenty of headroom once you're over the 150 watts margin. You've got loads and loads of headroom. So there we are. This is my hidden gem. I don't know how long they'll keep making them for, because they introduced the Artera range in 2005, so it's nearly 10 years already. Hopefully they'll keep making them forever and ever. That's typical Quad. They tend to run for a long time. But I would snap these up whilst they're available at this price. It's really impressive. So that is my take on those. In 7 days' time, I will be releasing the 33303, as I say. If you have been, thank you for watching. Let me know your experience. Maybe you have these in your home setup. If it was me, if it was this room or in my home, I think one of the stereo blocks would be enough. I don't think I would need the 2 mono blocks with the Sibelius loudspeakers. Yeah, if I had the space, I would probably have them anyway, just for fun. But I think, 140 watts per channel into 8 ohms is more than enough, plenty of headroom. And I think I would settle on that. And yeah, there we go. See you in the next video. If you have been, thank you for watching and enjoy the music.